Dear ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues and friends, I'm talking about our small workshop on linking tourism and conservation, which was an exploratory workshop and a finance initiative for protected areas. So it took only a very narrow sector of what you are talking about in broad at this conference here. And we were actually talking mainly about money, which on one side rules the world, on the other side people not always want to talk about money. So we directly talked about money and conservation. UNEP Grid-Arendal is a Norwegian foundation which once has been established by Gro Harlem Brundtland as a contribution to the United Nations Environmental Programme. We are supporting UNEP in a way of producing communication tools and are involved in assessments and facilitation of processes. So in this way, we also support the UN Environmental Programme related conventions. And the angle of this workshop and this initiative was targeted on the Convention on Biological Diversity, the CBD, which has been open for signature in Rio in 1992, and meanwhile has 190 parties, and is the key international binding instrument which covers the issue of preserving the world's biodiversity. And one of the major elements to do so, to really try to preserve all the representative habitats and ecosystems of our globe, is the work on the protected areas, to establish a worldwide representative network of protected areas. That is one of the CBD's major work, and therefore all the 190 governments involved have also committed to a program of work on protected areas. And there's another very important organization which links both the governments, all the states which also signed the CBD, as well as non-governmental organizations and also the private sector in economics, which is the International Conservation Union, IUCN. And IUCN has a special commission on protected areas. So they produce all the overviews about what exists worldwide, and actually they are informing the world about the about 150,000 protected areas which are already existing. And that's still not reaching the goal. There's a goal to have at least by 2010 a complete network of protected areas, which should cover in a representative way both the terrestrial ground as well as the marine. On the terrestrial ground we have done quite well. 12% of the globe's surface is protected, but on the marine side there's less than 1%. There's a lot to do. And even on the land there's a lot to do, because lots of these parks are paper parks, where you have set aside protected areas, but nobody really cares what happens inside. I come back to that. Then there's another important player in this whole field, and we all combine those and work together with them, and they have been all in Arendal. That's UNEP's Division for Technology, Industry and Economics, which has its base in Paris, where Stefanos is coming from, and where Stefanos has under his wings all the tourism issues within UNEP. So that is, for instance, the large tour operators initiative, where he works with the world's leading tour companies, a huge operation. And he is also leading a task force called Sustainable Tourism, which is in the framework of the so-called Marrakesh process, which is a promotion of sustainable consumption and production and a follow-up of the Johannesburg World Summit on Sustainable Development. This initiative to find ways to link tourism with conservation by raising funds from the tourism sector for protected area management is also a project under his task force. We have a very ambitious vision which we put forward with this project initiative, call it the LTNC vision, to just initiating a major global process which increasingly and finally also sustainably channels money from the worldwide tourism sector into the worldwide protected area network. As I told you, there is a lot of paper parks, there's a lot of need to really manage this worldwide network of protected areas. And in the last World Parks Congress, there has been produced a figure which is saying that if you once would have a complete network of protected areas, it would cost about 30 billion of US dollars to manage all that. That includes, of course, all kinds of involvement of local communities, local people, poverty elevation, and so on and so on. And that money has to be raised, and lots of initiatives have been thinking about how to do that. And actually, this huge figure of 30 billion is only 0.5% of the world's tourism turnover about. So that to give you a dimension. Therefore, we are having that kind of framework. But why are we then focusing only on the tourism? That's not only because tourism is the world's leading economical sector. It is because the tourism is the most interested sector of our society in protected areas. And as we heard it from Paul Eagle, the tourism chair in the World Commission on Protected Areas in IUCN, there's more than 50% of tourists which travel over the world are making use of protected areas, and that figure is increasing. So protected areas is an asset for tourism. Therefore, there's also another justification why we want to work with tourism and try to raise significant amount of money for the management, which is then benefiting also the quality for the tourism and what tourists are looking for. And there is another reason for that. There exists a number of mechanisms and cases in the world where actually tourism is supporting the management of protected areas. And therefore, at our workshop, we were first of all in the first section looking at all the different mechanisms which exist and may be thinkable. Then we looked on the other side, on the receiving side, on the protected areas. Of course, that's not only a challenge to raise funds from the tourism sector, it's an equal challenge to also identify those protected areas which in a transparent and in a safe way can make use of money. Then we looked at best practices and real models. And in the end, we looked at organizational possibilities to bring this forward. We had a lot of very relevant participants. I will not go through all of them, about 60 people representing the CBD, UNEP, DTRE, the World Conservation Monitoring Center, UNESCO, WWF, Conservation International, TIES as one of the supporters, different ministries from Costa Rica and Norway, and tour operators and initiators and expedition leaders, banks, investment funds. When we looked into the mechanisms, we identified and talked about a number of them. I only put a few of them here on this slide and will only talk about a few of them either. The entrance fee or the user fee is of course the most basic and most simple one. That is still something which one has to work in many countries of. There are countries where that is working very well. Nepal, Costa Rica has been cases where this is well introduced and is functioning quite well. There are other countries where this is a mechanism, but it is not really working in practice because the transparencies on the national park sites are not that working. Then there are special tour operations which work together with NGOs or have established foundations, a site like Punt Parks for Europe or Base Camp, or WWF is working with the Tour Operators Initiative. These are approaches where very targeted the link between tourism and conservation is meant to be made. There are also big initiatives where investment funds, in particular the one of Conservation International, where the ventures which already exists are aiming to finance two operations which make that link, and others are in preparation, like PricewaterhouseCoopers is doing something like that. I will not go into all the others. Just say that we also talked about criteria for protected areas which should be benefiting from this initiative and from any kind of initiative to raise funds from the tourism. First of all, it needs to be made very, very clear that those national parks operate in a way that money is dealt with in a very transparent way and an accountable way, that there are business plans and independent audits and so on and so on. And there are several other criteria which you could think of. We looked, and that was the most exciting part of our conference, in a number of really functioning examples. And the leading country, which you will have heard a lot of in this conference as well, and we'll also hear again from the minister, is of course Costa Rica. Costa Rica is the spearheading country which has made it work, the link between conservation and tourism. We also had from the operational side Karen, which is sitting over there, making a very, very convincing case about La Barrios, where it is really functioning on the ground, this connection. And we had Nature Air, which is the first airline which is totally carbon neutral and invests those parts of the added ticket value into protected areas. We talked about base camp in Masai Mara in Kenya, the fun park issues. Also Norwegian case, Svalbard, the most northern part of Norway, the archipelago close to the North Pole. They have introduced an entrance fee for everyone, and they will use it to fill up a fund, which then supports, in addition to the continuous and ongoing management activities of the government, continues and adding up to management of the big national parks up there. And I don't have the time to go further examples. The final findings, and we have a huge amount of ideas and comments and recommendations gathered, which we will display later on our website. The main thing is that people thought that we really should establish a major framework, not necessarily a new organization, but a framework where we can make visible every single case of the world where actually this is functioning, that tourism is supporting protected areas, particularly financially. And in this framework, certainly the CBD needs to play a role, the IUCN World Commission on Protected Areas, also the UN World Tourism Organization and the UNEP tourism activities in DTIE. They all should make sure that there is a consistent framework, something which is also branded and is known and made visible to everyone which is maybe interested in this thing, and give a possibility that all these existing examples are replicated, are learned from, and that there is a major snowball rolling, that there is a positive competition process where everyone can make itself with its own initiative visible. For that, we certainly need something like a web portal with probably a Wikipedia tool and making visible the best practices, and in particular make the links between the places where tourism takes place and where they invest into protected areas. The World Conservation Monitoring Center, another unit of UNEP, which is handling the UN list on protected areas, every second year produces the list of the 150,000 protected areas with all kinds of data. They could also add data on linking tourism and conservation and exact information, who is doing what, and so on. The CBD Secretariat also added some own thoughts and made commitments that they would also be very responsible for that kind of framework, and would, in their next meeting of the governments, the COP8 in Bonn, will look for possibilities to engage the governments in this and make it an instrument of the program work on protected areas. The NGOs and all, they should play a role. I mentioned WCMC and Grid-Arendal will certainly also play a role, and the participants there thought that we should continue to play a role as a kind of information broker and facilitator for all kinds of public-private partnership in this way. The actually exciting part of the very end was that all these different participants at this workshop made some kind of commitments. I can't list them all here. I selected a few. Han Parks wants to establish a corporate club for donations. Will bring them together and make concrete cases where the corporate sector is financing protected areas. BR&gt, the existing investment fund of Conservation International, they promised that they will support at least 3 tourism enterprises which in the very next future want to produce new examples in our context. Norway, of course, they have said that in other cases as well, but has stated again that they will continue to support UNEP, and they also stated again that, as you said just now, that they will be carbon neutral by the mid-century and will also investigate in kind of mechanisms where with carbon set-offs they can also support biodiversity conservation. And so on and so on. PricewaterhouseCoopers, for instance, they want to commit all their national branches that they offset their carbon and will relate that to biodiversity aspects. So only looking at all these commitments, we think that we have achieved already something if that is all getting into place. And I was asked to bring the message from Arendal here to Oslo in order that you help us to identify and initiate more concrete examples. We certainly have looked only in a selection of existing examples. There exist certainly more and are more thinkable. We also would like to ask you to find or provide more funds for such individual good initiatives. And there will certainly be also some needs for establishing these frameworks where we can show this competitive process of good examples. You should disseminate the message altogether. You should help us to link more strategic partners to it, and altogether help that we can make together bring the momentum forward. Thank you very much for listening to us.